Hello, and thank you so much for joining us today for the webinar Show Me the Impact Smarter Evaluation for CLC Legal Education. My name is Sammy Cooper. I'm a capacity building lead at Community Legal Centres Queensland and a proud Gumbaynggirr woman. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge and pay my deepest respects to the traditional owners on the land in which today's webinar is being hosted. In Meanjin, Brisbane, these are the Turrbal and Yagara peoples to the north and south of the river. I pay my respects to their elders past and present and acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded. And as we come together today to share knowledge, reflect on practice, and learn from one another, I also want to recognise that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples have been teaching, learning, evaluating, and passing knowledge between generations for tens of thousands of years. And we honour those enduring knowledge systems and the strength of the communities that continue to share wisdom, stories, and learning in ways that create positive change. I want to extend a warm welcome to any First Nations people joining us online. And today we're pleased to welcome Tanya McKenna, who's the Deputy CEO of Northern Community Legal Centre, to share practical tips and insights on evaluating community legal education, measuring impact beyond participant numbers, and using evidence to strengthen programs and demonstrate outcomes. I will let the fabulous Tanya tell you a bit more about herself when I hand over in a moment. But before we do that, some quick housekeeping. Today's webinar is being recorded and we'll have the recording available to download from the website in the on-demand section later this week. You will also receive an email with the link if you've popped the right email in. The recording will be provided after the session to everybody who registered. We do encourage you to ask questions. Type them in as you think of them into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. We will hold questions to the end, but please feel free to type them in as you think of them. I'll hand over to Tanya and talk to you when it's time for questions. Thanks, Tanya.
Thanks, Sammy. Thanks, everyone, so much for inviting me. It's a pleasure to have the opportunity to chat to my interstate colleagues. So today's webinar, let me just move through the slides. I would like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands that I'm coming to you from. So I work for Northern Community Legal Centre. We're a generalist legal centre that's in Melbourne's north. And our catchment begins in Seymour, which is on Taungurung country, and extends down to Brunswick, which is on Wurundjeri country. So I'd like to acknowledge that this always was and always will be Aboriginal land. So nice to meet you. Just a little bit about us or about me. These are my fabulous colleagues you can see in the photo. The sun is shining. It does sometimes shine in Melbourne. But my background is that I've worked at a range of community legal centres. So this is my third CLC that I've worked at. In between, I've worked in education and training roles in the family violence sector as well. When I was asked to do this session, I said, you do realise I'm not an evaluation expert. I'm just someone who's done a lot of education and a lot of evaluation along the way. So I will be trying to avoid a lot of the evaluation speak and put things in fairly plain, easy to understand terms that I use in my practice. It will also be an opportunity for me to show you what I've learned along the way, some of the mistakes I've made and how we've addressed some of the challenges that come within the CLE education space. So housekeeping, so as Sammy mentioned, put your questions in the Q&A. Importantly, I will share the slides afterwards. So if you're worried about taking notes, don't. You'll get all the information that's provided in the presentation today. No one knows everything. Together we know a lot. So I also look forward to your insights, which we will hopefully have time to hear from you as well. You might have some other tips, tricks, or things that have come up for you in your practice. We would love to hear from you as we get to that part of the presentation. So why do we do evaluation? It's partially about our quality improvement processes. We want to make sure that what we're doing is effective. We want to learn from our audience and we want to improve what we're doing as we go along. It's also part of our reporting to our funders and stakeholders. So what did we do with the funding and the money and the resources that were invested with us, and what kind of impact did it have? We're showing the value of legal education. Where legal services, people think about legal service delivery. We also need to show that education is equally important. And to do that, we need to be able to show the impact of education in preventing and doing early intervention, particularly for our community. And we can also use it for advocacy. So we're advocating for systemic change. We might be advocating for a project to be funded. This is part of our evidence base for the advocacy that we're doing more broadly as a sector. So starting off a little bit about learning the lingo. So starting at the bottom left, baseline is our starting point. If you're doing a program, you might do a survey at the start and then deliver 5 sessions and then do one at the end. The first survey is our baseline data, but this is what we've got to compare against. There's activities that we deliver. There's outputs. Outputs are what when I first started in this space, it was like we did this many workshops to this many people, we had this many sessions. That's your outputs of what you actually did. What we're now trying to move towards is, well, what did we do and what difference did it make? So when we talk about outcomes, we can talk about immediate outcomes, and then there's the outcomes that happen down the track, which are the more substantial outcomes. The indicators is how do we measure the change that we're seeing. So we might have an indicator that we want 80% of participants to show an increase in knowledge and competence to navigate the legal system. That could be one example of an indicator. Indicators, we want them to be measurable, we want them to be realistic, we want to be transparent about if we don't meet those indicators and what were the factors that prevented that. Impact. So when we refer to impact, we're really just talking about those medium to long-term outcomes. So we've got the short-term outcomes, people know a bit more. Now we're looking at, well, what did they do with that knowledge? What did that mean for them in the future? Were they able to avoid legal issues, act on their legal rights earlier? Were they able to support somebody else with a legal problem? Were they able to make better referrals to us as an organisation? And then we've got our data. We'll talk about quantitative data, which is basically our numbers and our data analysis. So from a survey, 80% of participants reported blah, blah, blah. And then we've got qualitative, which is our in-depth and rich data, where we have case studies, stories, focus groups. We're focusing often on a smaller percentage of the participants, but getting much more deeper, detailed information from them. Okay, so just a few kind of basics around evaluation. So evaluation is that step up from feedback. Feedback is, how did we do? You did great, really enjoyed the session. Evaluation is where we're looking a little bit more closely around what did we intend to achieve? What was the objectives? How did we go against meeting those specific objectives? It starts at the start of the project. So if you're doing a legal education project of some kind, we actually often do a program logic before we even do a funding application, because it helps you work through all the questions you might need to answer, but it also makes sure that you're really clear at the start about what you're trying to achieve. And then you can write it into that. How are you going to measure what you're trying to achieve? Involving the stakeholders is really important. So it might be just the people in your organisation that's going to be working on a particular legal education project. If you're partnering with another organisation, I will involve them as well. It ensures everyone's on the same page, but it also gets buy-in from everyone who needs to be involved into why we're doing these evaluation processes, which can take up a little bit of time and resources as well. If you are doing a really extensive evaluation, you might even include someone with lived experience or a consumer in that process to ensure that the evaluation design is kind of responsive to the particular group that you're working with. An important part of evaluation is that we're not only looking at the outcomes achieved, but also just how well do we implement what we said we were going to do. So it makes a lot of sense, right? If you've got to get the foundations right before you can see, did we get the outcomes achieved? So if it's implemented poorly, the presenter hasn't got the right knowledge, the audience speaks another language and the information wasn't accessible. If it was a really noisy room and no one could hear anything, these means that our outcomes won't be very valid. So it doesn't mean the project design was wrong, but if the implementation hasn't worked, the outcomes aren't going to be realised. So you'll hear evaluators talking about process evaluation or implementation evaluation. And then they might talk about impact evaluation or outcome evaluation. So they're the kind of two central components that we're looking at. It needs to be realistic, cost effective, and manageable. So if you're doing everyday CLE one-off presentations for a particular group as part of your core practice, that might be just a simple survey at the end of the session. If you've got a funded program of some kind, that's when you're going to be looking at doing a more comprehensive evaluation framework. If you've got a big funded project, that's when you might employ a consultant to come in and do the evaluation for you. Consultants are expensive. I've had projects where we've just used a consultant to set up the evaluation framework, and then we've done the evaluation ourselves. Drawback of this is that it may look a little bit biased if we're the ones doing the evaluation. So the advantage of having a consultant is that the funder knows that it's an independent person who's doing that piece of work. But it's a big chunk. It's a big chunk of resources. So today we'll look at kind of evaluation for a funded program. So you can see those different kind of evaluation approaches, but also just talk about tips and tricks for general kind of everyday CLE that you might do. Other things is that we need to think about doing it ethically, making sure that we're respecting people's rights and their privacy and their well-being. So how we do evaluation and what we ask of people might look a little bit different if they're in crisis. They might be a cohort who's experiencing family violence or family trauma. They might be people who've been through a natural disaster, a climate disaster, bushfires, etc. So we also have to be responsive to kind of the context in which we're working, making sure we're doing that in an ethical way, and that we're considering all of those broader issues that might be affecting the community that we're working with. So people may have heard about a program logic. This is one of the most basic, easy to use and really important evaluation tools. So in its most simple form, it's looking at, one, defining what the problem is that we're trying to address. So in a legal education space, that might be that our community has limited access to legal knowledge and understanding, particularly those more marginalised groups. What are we trying to achieve? Being really clear on that. So for instance, we might be trying to improve legal literacy and empowering people to navigate the justice system. What activities are we going to run? So these could be workshops, online courses, community outreach, fact sheets, etc. And then what are we trying to achieve? So what are we going to try and achieve immediately, in the medium term and in the longer term? Now, if you're like us, we juggle a whole range of funding sources. We have little bits of funding for small CLE projects. They rarely go beyond 1 year. So it might be difficult to show the long-term outcomes, or particularly where you don't have long-term engagement with that particular client group. So that can be just one of the complicated factors. And then so for some of those projects, it might be short and medium term might be the best that you can do. But we'll give you some tips on how to address that. So just a little bit more about impact. So as I said, we're looking at the medium to long-term impacts. They could be positive, negative, unintended impacts that's come about as a result of our particular program that we're delivering. Um, so the challenges, I've mentioned one is that how do you have that long-term engagement with people? How do we show how what we did impacts upon people over time? Sometimes that's easier in our legal service delivery space because we might be working with clients over years. I know, for instance, clients that we assist with migration issues, sometimes those applications take years to get resolved. So we might have some very long-term engagement with clients, but CLE is a bit trickier. We might get called in to just present to somebody else's group. It's a one-off session. How do we get that broader definition of impact? So some of the things we might do in that particular feedback survey is just try and get people to not only say how they found the session or how they feel. Do they feel like they've got more knowledge? Do they feel more confident? But being really quite specific. So what difference will this knowledge make to you? How might you use this knowledge in the future? One of the projects I'm working on at the moment with our team is a citizenship project for young people, where we're trying to get 15, 16, 17-year-olds to get their citizenship before they turn 18. And that's to make sure that they've got access to HEX help, which, depending on your visa type, might not be available if you're not an Australian citizen. So we're doing lots of education sessions and helping young people with those applications. Because those applications take 6 months within the 1 year funded project, we won't realise those outcomes. But to be able to at least when we meet with young people who aren't Australian citizens and do a legal education session, we can ask them whether they now intend to make an application as a result of the information they received today. So that's one example of how we try and navigate that time issue. There's also looking at if there is a difference, was it our project that made the difference? So this aligns with my next slide on data sources. So we might be doing a project that aims to intervene early to prevent the escalation of family violence through legal education, as an example. We might, under these secondary data, run a program for 3 years and then we can find a government data set or a police data set that tells us that family violence rates in our catchment have reduced slightly. Is that because of our wonderful program? It's a kind of a big bow to draw. But we might be able to pull out a case study from our program that shows someone who got help early as a result of our education session. And we can show that case study to demonstrate how that prevented things escalating to a point where it might need a police intervention. And we can say, this is how our program contributes to rates of family violence, which we can see have slightly declined over the last year. So that's how you might work with a secondary data set. The primary data sources we're going to be working with generally are surveys, satisfaction feedback forms. We might do interviews, we might do focus groups, we might do some observation of behaviours or environments, we might do some case studies, and they might all be part of what's in our evaluation framework. We might also use our case management systems data. So I know we have a case management system where we actually put all of our CLE into that. We also try to track clients who have been referred from CLE into the legal service to get help with a legal issue. So from this, we can show our outputs. We did this many sessions to this many people, but we're also trying to get better at actually putting outcomes into that database as well. So we're trying to, with our legal clients, establish where the client's legal outcomes met. And so we might be able to then use a case study of somebody that was referred from a CLE event into the legal service who had outcomes achieved. We can see that from our database, and that can also inform the evaluation of did this make a difference. So that's enough about data. So I'm going to give you a example of a program. And so this was a program that we've had funded through a few different sources to keep it running over a few years. And it's a family violence peer education program. So this particular program came about when we had a different project, which was to introduce a migration lawyer to our family violence team. And it was to provide wraparound support to women who are newly arrived on temporary visas who are really vulnerable to family violence due to their migration status. And so this raised the question of how do you reach women who are newly arrived in Australia, don't speak English, may have limited access to resources, don't know about Australian law, a really hard group to engage with. So that was our problem. Our idea was, why don't we look at recruiting local women who speak those language groups to become peer educators? And so our rationale was that women who are newly arrived are more likely to get information from other women of the same cultural community as a source of information. And so if we could equip those women, and particularly women who are really active in the community, by giving them the education, information, and resources, then that could be a way of reaching a hard to reach cohort. I say cohort, that's quite dehumanizing, but reaching that particular group. So our program goal was to reach those isolated women, encourage access to legal services, raise awareness in the multicultural community of the different forms of family violence, which had already been reported back to us as a really significant issue. So things like those dynamics of coercive control and financial abuse weren't well understood in those communities. And we also recognised that the engagement with some peer educators would also be a feedback loop for us to be able to deliver our services, including education and legal services, in a better way. So that was our kind of starting point for this particular project. Now, I have a video, and the video is partially because to break up me talking for the entire hour, but it's a video of the peer educators talking about the program, so it gives you a really good sense of what the program was, and then I'll show you how we evaluated it. Just a little tip before I show it to you. Our funders love a video, and it's another way of doing evaluation. So if you're doing interviews with your stakeholders, and you can capture that and put it into a nicely framed video, it's a really great to have something that you can use to both sell the program. Funders like to use it to be able to put onto their websites or into their comms as well, because they can also demonstrate the impact of the projects that they are funding. Now, I'm hoping the sound works as I go into this. Sammy, I'll rely on you to reach out and let me know if you can't hear it.
I've been
All good. Thank you.
always a person that want to help people, especially when it comes to family violence area. I've been a victim myself, but I was finding it hard to find like a place to go to get more knowledge.
When I came to Australia, I was really surprised to see that, my particular community, which is, the Punjabi and Hindi speaking community, are facing this problem on a massive scale.
At my son's school, I met a lot of South Asian women. They were not working, they didn't know the language, they didn't drive, they were dependent on their husbands for everything.
I wanted to help at least one person from this violence, and I promised myself that this will be my goal.
especially in my community, is really, really hard. The only a few things that people know about family violence is women calling the police on men. When it comes to a really complicated situation, they will feel safer to come and talk to a person like me that understand the language and understand the culture.
That's also part of your roles as peer educators. And remember that your community leaders, like people would know you and people would listen to you. So thank you for sharing this with.
The most beautiful thing about this project is like it brings a lot of women from different cultures together, and we're learning a lot from each other. Two of the ladies in our group, they were victim of family violence themselves. We can use them as examples that, yeah, I know a lady, she went through this, but now she's doing really great. She's got a job, she's independent, she's enjoying her life. We meet at school every day morning. We just sit together, we talk, we discuss.
There are some local women's group that meet regularly in community centers. I go to those groups and communicate with them, and then if there is something that's needed, I always put my hand up. I've helped people, finding the jobs or taking them to job mentors. I've taken them to, a legal center or taken them to the local library.
As the time have passed, I feel more and more confident about the information that I have, what I have learned, to pass it on to other women.
Always realizing that you've got this network to go back to has helped me gain more confidence in the work that I do.
If I know some women who doesn't speak my language, I know somebody from my group, I can just reach out to her that, yeah, she's the woman that can help you out. I know, I trust her.
Since I have been part of this program, as I promised myself, I have been able to help one lady, and the lady is quite well settled and happy in her life.
Yeah, so my vision for my community is that everybody is able to live their life to the fullest. Everybody is able to achieve their dreams. There is no second-class citizen wherein nobody knows about their rights.
Encouraging women just to take that one first step is the most important and most difficult thing.
More women, more network, more communication, more words out there. That's what we want.
Beautiful. Oh, it still makes me smile whenever I see that video. So yeah, we will talk about data and we'll talk about analysis and all the things, but sometimes I think it's that kind of qualitative way of summing up a program that has so much value. And so hopefully that gives you a good sense. And so, let me go on. Now, there's a lot of info on this slide. I hope you can see it all, but I just want to show you what a program logic looks like for this particular program. So we've got our activities down the side here. We're going to recruit, educate and train our peer educators. The audience is our peer educators. They're going to feel more confident to recognise and respond to other women. As a result of that, more migrant women will be accessing reliable information and accessing legal assistance. And as a result of that, the long-term impact is that migrant women receive legal protections earlier, are safer, and experience improved well-being. So you can see there we've got our short, medium, long-term impacts. And then the program logic allows you to put in a column, which is like, how are you going to collect it? What information are you going to gather? So for this one, we did a baseline survey of knowledge and confidence at the start of the training session. We did another one at the end of the session. We also did facilitated journaling. So this is another less understood form of data. There's often so many special things that happen in the sessions, which she might comment on through her journaling practice. So it could be a particular story that a peer educator tells about supporting a woman. It could be a change that they've made in their personal life in terms of gender equity and advocacy. So it's just another way of capturing things as you go along. For the medium-term outcomes, we wanted to see how many people were referred as a result of this program who received legal assistance. And we also had our peer educators reporting on the number of people that they assisted throughout the program. And then ideally for a long-term impact, we could interview one of the women who's been referred through this program into our legal service to do a more in-depth interview about what did this mean to have access to this information, what would they have done if they didn't have this information. And so we can kind of compare about, this is the story about what happened with the assistance. And we can tell kind of another story about what would have happened if this person didn't have access to this information in their own language from someone they trusted. I've only gone through the top row here. We had other things we were trying to do as well. We wanted to improve their confidence to talk publicly about sensitive topics like family violence. So we did some training around myth busting, what to do when people are reactive to you when you're talking, how to have those difficult conversations. We did awareness raising events for community, which were co-designed, which was designed to change community attitudes more broadly. And we also did a lived experience panel session where we were learning back from our peer educators about what we can do better. You find as you kind of get towards the longer term impacts that a lot of the activities and the short term outcomes will feed into one or two longer term outcomes. So you tend to have more, or you tend to have less in the long term impact because you have activities that might all pertain to an end goal in what you're doing. So this is the starting point, though, for an evaluation framework. You sit down and you do your program logic brainstorming. What is so effective is that you will be amazed what a difference it makes when you start to just have those discussions around what are we trying to achieve. Until you really dive deeply into that, you find that there's all sorts of assumptions that other colleagues may have made about what we're doing. And so it's just that incredibly useful exercise to really kind of go, not just what are we doing, but why are we doing what we're doing? And then your evaluation framework becomes these performance indicators and the data sources that you're going to collect. That's why you do this up early. It's because you need to know at the time of commencing, what are you trying to achieve and have your data tools all set and ready to go. And you want your surveys to align with your program logic. So you've decided what you want to demonstrate, make sure you've got the right questions in there to match the program logic. And then you can use that to then look at structuring your evaluation report. So this is just one short example, but you might have an intro saying, we're trying to address this problem. These were the program objectives. You might talk a bit about how you did your evaluation. You would do an overview of this was the project design and these were the activities delivered and these activities are already listed in your program logic. You will touch on, you'll go into your implementation. Did you do that well? Were there any learnings, successes or challenges? And then you do your impact evaluation. So you can structure this aligned to your program logic. These were the short-term anticipated outcomes. Did we achieve them? And then you can do that across your short, medium, and long-term impact outcomes. Any learnings and insights or recommendations for future program delivery. And then you might include your program logic and surveys, etc., as appendices to that report. So you can see how it all kind of fits together and just gives you that really structured way of doing your evaluation for the project. And you might do this just for your CLE generally. So you can sort of say, all right, we're going to have a standard CLE survey that we do for all of our one-off core funded activities that we do. Presentations to schools, presentations to community, presentations to other organisations. You might have a few different ones for different audiences. So this is the outcomes we want to achieve if we're presenting to another service. These are the outcomes we want to achieve if we're presenting to community directly. They might look quite different, but standardising within a really clear framework around what it is you're trying to achieve and having a consistent survey that you use. That then allows you to collate that data and use that for overall reporting when you're doing your 12-month core reporting process. So just to give you a little overview of some other models for evaluation. Theory of change, you might hear that one being thrown around. And there's a very complicated theory of change that a consultant worked with us to develop for our Safe Landing project. And that was our legal service delivery project for women on temporary visas experiencing family violence. And so you can see we have got lines going everywhere, interweaving, interconnecting. Essentially, it's really showing a very similar structure though to our program logic. We have down the side here activities, outcome, impact. And so you've got your activities, and it just does a little bit of a better job of showing how everything feeds into everything else. So it's got a little bit more context to it, but it is another way of doing essentially the same thing. I can tell you we were doing this program with another CLC, and it took us a good 6 months developing this evaluation framework. We came together to brainstorm this, but that was a couple of sessions. And then there was a lot of like, well, what do we mean by well-being? We throw out these terms all the time, but what does well-being mean? What are the indicators of well-being? And those kind of discussions were really important to have, because then it was like, okay, well, let's break this down and make sure we've been collecting data to these particular data sets. Another model that you might hear thrown about is the costs avoided modelling. This is very much in vogue and very much liked by government. It's something that the Victorian government has been quite focused on of late. And it comes under a series of kind of types of evaluation, which are economic models. And when I say economic, it's because it puts things into dollar terms. A little bit dehumanizing. We're talking about people, not dollars, but it's a way of demonstrating the cost benefits of the program that you're delivering. So through this program, we have avoided costs of police interactions, child protection involvement, mental health, homelessness. There's all these costs avoided because of this particular program. So you do that kind of cost benefit analysis. And what we want to show government is that early intervention saves money down the track. So it comes into how do we do that? So I'm going to give you just one example that I used. And I did say at the start, I'd show you some of the things that I've done wrong and some of our learnings along the way. So I'll show you that in this particular example. So this is a case study about a young person, Amir. His family fled conflict to arrive in Australia. They experienced trauma, family dislocation, cultural adjustment. And Amir was having poor school attendance. He had a mistrust of authority and was quite vulnerable to peer influences at the time. He was involved in an incident that got police involved. He wasn't the main offender, but he was charged with a serious offence, and that could have resulted in a criminal record and possible detention. We were doing a CLE presentation to that school on young people's rights with police. And as a result of that, Amir engaged with one of our lawyers after the session, and a follow-up appointment was made for Amir to get some legal advice through our youth service. As a result of that, our lawyer was able to advocate with police that diversion was the best option for Amir, looking at his experience of trauma and the potential for rehabilitation. The lawyer worked with the school wellbeing team, who assisted Amir with completing paperwork that was needed, and followed up with the family to ensure that Amir could attend both court and the program that was being proposed. And that was successful. Amir was granted a diversion order, and the program that he was participating in was designed to help young people build trust with police. So it was very specific to his situation. Amir successfully completed that program and is continuing to engage with the lawyer on some other legal issues that propped up during that engagement. We were using this case study to propose funding for a school lawyer program to show how effective it could be. And so the case study ends with demonstrating how a school-based legal education program can transform outcomes for young vulnerable young people. And so the cost benefit analysis, what does that look like? So this is how I did it originally, and I will tell you that I cheated and used AI and said, here's a case study, give me some cost benefit analysis. And AI came back and I was like, oh my God, look at me go, this is amazing. And I checked all the references and sources. There was things like Productivity Commission, what they found that particular costs of things were. And I was like, great, credible sources. We can use this in to say costs avoided. I then consulted with one of my colleagues, Lottie, who I think is tuning in today as well, who has extensive experience in evaluation as a consultant. And she pointed out that when you've got different sources for cost analysis, they'll be using different methods. They might be double dipping. Some of our team, including Lottie, also had a meeting with some people at Treasury who were saying that they have their very specific ways of working out this analysis. And what is the greatest benefit to them is just for us to be able to pinpoint the kinds of things that they should be considering in their analysis. So we might be saying, these are the cost savings for you to calculate at Treasury around avoidance of youth detention, avoidance of children court proceedings, legal assistance, police resources, prevented recidivism, preventing educational disengagement, and preventing mental health support down the track. So that's my learning and that's my sharing, is that consider how you can present a case study that maybe shows those particular areas where costs might be avoided. I've seen some people demonstrate this really well, where they've actually kind of told a client's story along the way in a sort of very pictorial way. But as they go through, they're highlighting the benefits and costs avoided of the story. So there might be some great ways that you can think of for doing that. I also thought I'd just share some learning. So with our peer educators that you heard from earlier, we asked them about how should we be delivering CLE? What things should we be doing differently? We learned a lot about how family violence is understood in their cultures, the difficulties and constraints they experience, and the things that we need to think about in our presentations. So some of the things they said was use videos, radio, podcasts, social media, not fact sheets and written materials. They were really keen on us using storytelling to do legal education. That was their preferred way of learning. They were really specific in what they wanted. So they wanted stories that we were talking about family violence. They wanted stories around how the different types of law could be used to assist, protect, enable women to build financial independence. They wanted stories that were realistic. So it wasn't like, oh, and everything was wonderful. It showed struggle, it showed difficulties, but it showed the women getting stronger and over time regaining their independence. They wanted bright, positive, strong imagery as well. You'll see that I've put in a little hyperlink here, and that's just an example of how we turned their feedback into a way of creating client stories, doing exactly what they told us to do. One of our peer educators even did some graphic design, which we used to create the rest of our client stories. So if you go to the Northern Community Legal Centre website and go to there's a client stories tab, you'll be able to see some of those examples and the hyperlink is there. They also spoke about the impact of traditional gender roles and to be ensured that we're not making people feel judged or expecting that they can actually transform what's happening in their families and communities. And that was really great feedback for us because we were about to do a program for young women focused on preventing financial abuse, and most of our audience were going to be from diverse cultural backgrounds. So we actually showed them one of our modules and got their feedback on it. They wanted us to think about how we do translations. They said they are so often wrong, and I know this myself from experience. I have an Arabic speaking worker who translates a lot of our materials, and she'll come to me and say, Tanya, there's no translation for this legal term. If I express it like this, is that correct? And sometimes we have to consult with our lawyers and play with the wording quite a few times to get it right, which makes me think, I don't know how much stuff we put out there that is not legally correct or has things in it that just do not make sense. They also said, look at incorporating AI to help with translations in a website. I haven't done that as yet. Our website's pretty basic and very low cost, but it's something that we will try and look at in the future. They said to be really careful about imagery, don't align negative stereotyping. So don't have a family violence poster that shows someone who's from an obvious cultural group or faith group, because we're stigmatizing that community in doing that. Don't use cartoon figures, because too often they play on cultural stereotypes as well. And make sure that we're using those strength-based stories and images that we use as well. So focus group, one form of evaluation, and that's an example of the kind of really rich learnings you can get by doing that more in-depth evaluation process with a particular group. There was a lot more. We also spoke about our legal practice service delivery, but that can be a whole nother webinar in there. So coming towards the end, and I'll try and wrap up so we've got time for answering the questions, but just some everyday tips and tricks, some of which I've probably already covered. So I've mentioned about trying to do some common program logics to use across your CLE program generally. But any kind of funded project, I would say create one particularly for that funded project that you're doing. And the bigger the funding, the bigger and more comprehensive your evaluation framework should be, and potentially getting someone external to come in and do that for you. One of the things that we did as well, we had all these surveys that were actually asking all sorts of different questions in different ways, and sometimes that was really important. We might be adjusting it for different audiences, so we might use different language for young people compared to newly arrived people, compared to another particular community group. But the questions were often asking about the same outcomes, and so we kind of just did a little bit. And when I say we, it was our wonderful evaluation expert, Lottie O'Day, who did this work. They created kind of a question bank with questions for different audiences, but all relating to similar outcomes. And that's totally fine, because we can still collate that information under the particular outcome that we're trying to achieve. Make sure you include a way of identifying the program that you're reporting on, and that's just a learning from me that we've sometimes used the same survey for everything, and then you've got all these anonymous surveys and you can't break up the answers to talk about a particular project. So make sure you work through a way of doing that, whether it's copying and creating and just doing a separate survey for each presentation, is what we do. We've all had the issues of struggling to get feedback. People run away, they don't provide feedback. Hopefully you'll provide feedback at the end of this session, but you might just log off and not provide feedback. We also look at ways of saving feedback. We get so much informal feedback. So an email that says, thank you so much for that presentation. People told me afterwards that it meant a lot and they will be able to use it in this particular way. We save those, that's gold. So grab those, ask the person sending it to you if they mind if we reuse their comments for reporting purposes. And even we do something similar with our client feedback as well. Clients weren't doing feedback surveys, but they're sending our lawyers these beautiful letters saying what a difference they made. And so we've now followed that up with, are you happy for us to be able to use those words publicly in a de-identified way? Online sessions, you can use integrated polls. Both Zoom and Teams has some polls where you can just do one or two quick questions at the end. That's a good way to make sure you get a little bit of feedback. There's also electronic tools. I don't know if people have used Mentimeter before, but it's basically where you can have an interactive slide. And so, for instance, you could say to people, log in here, answer the question, one word that describes this session. And as they're putting in that word, a word cloud is created on the screen and you can see all the words coming together. do that where think about the audience if you're doing that. If I wouldn't do that for a group of year 11 students because you might get a lot of words that are totally inappropriate for you. So I would do it with our peer educators, wouldn't do it with high school students. But it is a really good fun tool that you can use for that really engaging way of doing some evaluation activities. Another thing, we often get asked by people running programs to come and talk to their groups. Asking the facilitator to do some follow-up questions in their next program activity after you have left is another really good way of collating some feedback. And you know it's going to be honest feedback that's given to the facilitator. And they're usually quite happy to do that as well. We often do that if you forget to do a survey, we all do it, don't worry. But that's another way of going, could you please follow up and ask these 3 questions to your group the next time you meet? We would love to get that feedback. And finally, make use of what's already done. So the Victorian Federation of Community Legal Centres has developed an outcomes measurement framework. It's quite old now, but it is still so incredibly relevant. So it looks at all the things that we do in legal service delivery, including education. It looks at what are the outcomes that we could be establishing, what performance indicators that we could be using. And so it's a really great shortcut for when you're doing this work. And so the link to that will be in the slides that I'll send out after this as well. And of course, it's a universal, it's not Victorian specific. So by all means, make use of those resources for yourself in your work. Now, I think that is taking me to the end of the presentation. So I will stop sharing. And I was looking to see, I'm sorry, I haven't been looking at the Q&A as we go along. And I was just trying to find.
We've got a couple of issues with our Q&A, but I have got some very keen beans who have emailed me through a couple of questions. So I might ask those. And if anybody else wants to ask a question or you have a burning one, feel free to email it to me now. My email is sam@clcq.org.au. I'm happy to read them out now. The first one is around, I'm just going to reword it to make it a little bit shorter. It's a double banger. About the value of lived experience input into the evaluation questions at the development of those questions stage rather than relying on prior knowledge, I guess.
Yeah, and so look, I do think that if you're able to do that, it's a tricky thing to do because I also feel quite strongly that we should value lived experience and pay people for their time and efforts as well. So firstly, I think it does require some resourcing for them to be involved. But I think particularly when we're talking about groups that are quite marginalised, they might be going through a whole range, looking at the appropriateness of the questions that we're asking, the right time of when to ask questions as well, the ways in which we might frame those questions. And I guess it's the information, for instance, that we were getting back from our peer educators when we did that focus group. If you can get that to inform your project design at the start, we did it the wrong way around. We delivered the program and then we did a focus group. If we had involved them at the start, that would have informed the project design of what we did initially and would have been a much better process. So, yep, I think that is fantastic if you can do that involvement.
Thank you. I love the idea of the focus groups as well. I took so much out of that. Their feedback was so valuable. I'm sure you guys loved it as well. And Victoria does some really incredible tools. So I'm really pleased that you included a link to that one at the bottom. They do such a great job. The next one is around the outcomes of the evaluation. What happens when it's really bad, particularly where you are reporting back to funders and more specifically around the integrity of the information that you are collecting?
Yeah. And I have had conversations with one of our funding bodies around this, and it wasn't in the context of an evaluation that we had done. It was just we were having general conversations around when you don't reach your performance indicators. And this particular funder, and I can't say that we were speaking to all funders, but this particular one was saying they really want to know that. And it's really around the learnings and analysis around the reasons why we didn't achieve that. Was it around the project implementation stage? Was it around, often when we do projects, we're piloting something. So we start with a program logic, but we've got all these assumptions that are part of that program logic. And sometimes those assumptions are false. And so this particular grants manager was saying to me that we really want to know about that, because that goes into our funding logic around what's worked, what's been tried, what hasn't worked. It's not a failure. I did have one project which was all designed around, which I thought would create incredible efficiencies for us as an organisation. It actually created more work. And we did a forum for the sector around this. It was actually about incorporating a triage AI into our website. And it actually created more work for our admin team. We thought it would save time. But that work was actually really informative to the rest of the sector, who are all trying to do the let's use technology to make our work smarter. So even though we didn't continue with what we were doing and we didn't have a successful outcome, we're now being asked to participate in other people's advisory groups, because we've got that knowledge and experience of what we tried and what did and didn't work as well. So there's still value. There's value in looking at what doesn't work, provided we can explore why and have a really good rationale. It's a little bit more difficult if it's like we did a really bad job on implementing the project, or we didn't think through some things. One of the things that I didn't include in the program logic, because I kept it quite simple, was that another thing that you add to it is where you work through what are the assumptions underlying the program logic, and what are the external factors that could impact upon the program outcomes. And so I can send you through a template that gives you a space for doing that in that structure. But that is specifically designed to ensure that we start to think about what could change. COVID could happen. When I first was running Take the First Step for the first time, we had COVID run. The first time I was meeting our peer educators, had to switch to being online, and most of them didn't speak English very well and hadn't used technology. So we had to suddenly, that's a hard one to predict. Didn't know that was going to happen, but we had to pivot very quickly and put some additional resources just in helping people to get online to run that program. So yes, there's a lot of things that can impact your project. That's why it's really good to brainstorm those things at the very starting point.
That's great. Thank you. And we've got one more question that's come through that I think will be really valuable for everybody listening. When it comes to the cost saving model, is the feedback not to give the numbers, but to provide the story and let government calculate the savings themselves? Having an issue where government won't provide the numbers involved in court proceedings and police time and that kind of thing, but they are asking for a cost saving analysis. And what is your advice on the best way to do this or to move forward?
So firstly, I am not an economist person of any kind. I was thinking before, I'm not even a lawyer or an evaluation person. So I'm a total fraud in this space, basically. I've just worked in it for a long period of time. Numbers are not my thing. And that's why I was like, oh, maybe AI can give me the information. As our evaluation expert pointed out, I could very well have been double dipping for things in the way that cost analysis was done. I only have the information based on one conversation that we had, which was around, the feedback from government that really just they will do their own analysis. So I don't have a clear, great answer on that, I'm afraid. I see a lot of consultants who come up with cost benefit analysis, and I would love to also have a webinar on how to do this well. So if anyone has knowledge in that field, let me know, because I'll tune in as an audience member for that one.
Yes, I completely agree. It would be great to get more information. So if anybody does have any really good ideas for presenters, please email me and let me know. We would love to do that. And I can empathize with how difficult it is to get an accurate version of the numbers that doesn't reflect poorly on communities because of bias interpretation of that data. So completely understand that in that last question, that would be a really tricky thing to have to navigate through. So hopefully some of this stuff has been a bit helpful. In terms of what happens now, if anybody does have any further questions, apologies that the Q&A isn't working, please feel free to email them through to me. We can take them on notice. If CLCQ can't provide some answers, then we will get in touch with Tanya and we can work that through. Thank you so much for your time and your expertise. You keep repeating that you're not an expert, but I can't tell you how grateful we are that you've come online and shared so much really practical examples that are incredibly valuable. And thank you to everybody who joined us. I hope you picked up a few ideas, tools, and tips. I certainly did. So thank you so much. And hopefully you can take some of that back to your own work. Before you go, another reminder that there is a feedback survey that will pop up on your screen once we close the webinar, and that feedback really helps us to continually improve our webinar program. You can pop your questions in that as well, so I can take them either from an email or from the survey that will pop up. And that's it from us. Thank you so much again. We are very grateful for your time. We hope you have a great rest of your day, and we look forward to seeing you at another CLCQ webinar soon. Thank you.
Thank you.